Today's video is going to be a very special one because I have a special guest. His name is Eric. Let's just give Eric some time to introduce himself. If you can go ahead.
Thank you for having me today. My name is Eric, as Feli said. I'm actually from Bukavu, Congo, and been basically out of the country for some times now. And right now I work in finance and more focusing on the natural resources and things like that. So I'm really happy to be and sharing with you.
So, because we're from Congo, so we will use Congo as an example a lot. But just think of this topic as something that concerns a lot of African countries, because Africa is a very natural resource abundant continent. Because he's in that kind of field, I just wanted to get his insight about resource management on the African continent, and also how do you think that differs from the way that resources are managed here?
That's a very interesting one.
Yeah.
Well, when I think of the resource field and comparing, like most of countries, African countries, and how resources are managed in Western countries, there's a very big difference. And reason being, most of the management that happens in Western countries, they're all streamed, they all have channels and procedures to follow. So you have your application stage to approval to until when you actually start mining. It's a whole process, and all those processes, different department that you get approval from. Whereas from my belief is back home or in Africa in general, most countries, it's basically your application, you get approved by the government and done. So people are not even, people don't know what's happening. But in these Western countries, the process actually involves people. If the development or the management is going to be done here, then people in this area are going to be known. If the mining is going to be done in a particular area, there is actually an expression of interest that's posted to people in that area. Basically, anyone who have view or anyone who have a different view on that project will come up and be given a chance to speak on why they think it's good or why they think it's bad. And then the approval is basically going depending on what people say, or basically, always the majority wins.
And I think that's a very interesting thing, because I've heard stories, for example, of people being moved from mining sites and things like that, because if they were already living in a place and then new resources have been found, people have to be moved. And this, I've heard stories like this a lot coming from Congo. And I'm just not clear on how they manage that in Congo, because they're always talking about, we had to move this many people, 10,000 people up the mining sites and things like that.
Yes.
Do you think they follow the same procedures as Western countries do?
Well, I doubt that will follow the same procedures, of course, because when you think of mining or resources in general, it's a multi-billion-dollar business. All right. So most of these judgments are made again on what the prospect and what's in. So let's say, for example, in Australia, all the land is actually managed by the crown. So so basically, the Queen has more to say. All the land here, whether you buy a house, literally what you own is the house, not the land. So when they post the expression of interest, they basically include all these things in mind. So they know, okay, this is the amount of people that we have there, and those people still have their say on saying, well, how does it impact them if that has to happen. So of course there's going to be a payout, because if you need to relocate, it's you who is given the power first, and the community to say, okay, well, they have to look on all the pros and cons on if we're going to allocate these people, where are they going to go, and of course they're going to be all the studies behind it on okay, well, once we finish this ground here won't be used for anything else for this many years. Whereas back home, again, it goes back to the government have all the say. So here, of course,
so people are not contacted, they're not included in the process.
No.
They're just kind of surprised, okay, you're moving, because the government decided for that to happen.
Yeah, so which is, it brings me to one thing actually that I'm amazed about, because I see a family back there, and I still talk to them. And I'm actually very happy and proud that now we actually moved to that stage where if you own a land, you need to have papers and proof for everything.
Okay.
Because that's a very difference with here. Here, when you own your place, you have all the documents, lot number, you have all the documents in your name. So if someone wants to come and threaten you about a place, you're like, this is my place. Yes, it's owned by the crown. The land is owned by the crown, but you do have the papers to say that it's yours. So the negotiation is with you and the person.
There's one more phenomenon that I feel like is also triggered by the resources that Africa holds. Superpowers, let's call them superpowers, kind of wrestling each other for the control of the African continent.
Yes.
And I've heard stories of a few, I'm not going to say the names just so I don't vex anybody out there.
Yep.
I've heard stories about, certain African countries who are now controlled by some of these superpowers and things like that. And part of this happens because some of these African countries owe a lot of money to these superpowers and stuff. And this money that they owe, they're not actually able to pay it. Okay, and so they end up not really having a say on how to maybe run their country. Like, how can we arrive at the point where an outside state claims ownership of some of the major institutions in an African country? How do we arrive there? What do you think about that?
If we go back to the resources, which is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
What we do in our countries is that we sell the resources. But isn't in Western countries, they lease their resources. So it's different. Yeah.
They rent them.
Yeah. So if when they come in our countries, they buy and they tell you, oh, we're buying this entire area, we're going to mine it. Okay. And what they do is when they buy, they actually buy the land. Whereas in this country, like in Australia, because the land is owned by the crown, you can't buy it. So you lease it.
It's not your land.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically what you say is you have to prove first the papers on how, like the minerals and how much is in there and what you estimate. So all these feasibilities have to be submitted with your quote. With mine, they actually count it on grade. So grade is basically you saying when we dig, say for example, in 1 kilo of dirt that we dig, there is 60% gold. Okay. So because what you do is, even with financing, is you need to show those papers. Because if you're spending X amount of money to dig 1 kilo, but you're not getting that money back and you're not getting finance. So what you do is basically you submit those papers and say, okay, this project is worth this much money. This is what it's going to generate to the country. Okay, in your economy.
How can you maybe prevent? Because I feel like every area that has a lot of mining, that has a lot of minerals, there could be some type of corruption and things like that. How do you prevent the state from being ripped, if you will, like from being robbed?
Well, that's all comes in with all the rules that are put in place. Okay, let's say for example, like in Australia, you have Department of Resources and Minerals. All right, they can't come and make decision on behalf of the Department of Land. Okay, so they're separate. Okay, so every department has its own ways, and those are the stages that you have to pass through. So you get clearance from one stage to another. Whereas back home is the government that just make a decision. So the government just goes, oh, you believe there is minerals there, go for it. Or we're going to buy this whole area.
So do you think then the centralization of power is an issue?
Totally.
For how the African resources are being exploited, kind of. So you think that if they separated their powers, like if they decentralized the whole process, it would have been a bit more efficient?
I do believe so.
Then who keeps them accountable? When you separate power, who keeps the different departments accountable?
Well, that's the point, because one person reports to another. Okay, let's say for example, in Australia, if you want to mine in Queensland, you're not going to submit your application in Canberra just because that's where the Prime Minister is. You have to be cleared all through in Queensland first before you can go to the next stage. Okay, so their department, you can't just go and say, oh, because I know the Prime Minister, I'm just going to the Prime Minister, because each state has its own rules. However, they are all governed to be approved for every stage. Like, I've seen projects that got stuck just because the locals didn't approve, or the locals said, no, there's actually some animals there that are very worth to our place, and like some people say, oh, there are eggs there of this animal and they need to hatch first. Okay, and they have to respect that. But what happens in our country, and going back to what you're referring to and saying we have so much loan, is many of these loans we don't even know what they're for. So someone comes and they buy a land or a place. They go to the president who is all the way in the capital city in Kinshasa, like if you have to think of our country. And then this sale that's being done is in area the president doesn't know it's part of the country.
But I feel like in situations like, if we have to take the Congo's case, for example, corruption is on every level. Okay, so I feel like one of the fears as well, as much as the central government is also kind of can be involved in corruption-related activities and things like that. Should we then take corruption from the central government and then corruption from provincial government? There should be some type of accountability in a situation like in Congo, for example. Institutions are not really that strong on their own. So how do you think, what are the processes that we can start to make sure that people who are given some type of power on resources, how can we make sure that they are held accountable, and which are the institutions that you think we can solidify?
When I think of the corruption, this saying that corruption are on all levels. Well, let's go to the example that I just said of how the process goes in our country, where people ignore the premier, or like in our country we call them governors, of that region, and go straight to the president. So if it's already up to the president who is above you, you really don't have a choice. So what you do is you basically get your share as well, okay? Because you won't say no, and this is the biggest problem in our country. People are basically like, it's like me saying like, okay, well, I want that job and I'm not director of that company, so why should I go and apply to a manager? Well, the director will just give me the job anyway. So I think what needs to be done first is we need to have departments that are accountable for everything. Okay, we need to have systems in place that have to be respected. Okay, and then we have to go back to the notion of no one is above the law.
So you're saying that when mining companies come with proposals to mine in African countries, for example, they are more prone to be contacting the central government.
The problem that we have in most of our economy is that we always think that everyone is acting for their own. Okay, whereas a country should always work together. The states look on how does it contribute to our people. Okay, what does it bring to us? Is it good for environment? Is it good for the people? Is it good for this? They do the assessment along with the team of those people, where basically they look on each side. Because national level, it's most likely someone who's doing that area. So to them, soon as a state submits those papers to them and say, hey, look, we've done the feasibility, is what it's called, so basically the costing and everything, and this is beneficial to us, A, B, C, D. They give you the reasons, okay? So they're how is it contributing to the country? But back home, we don't have that much. Reason being, let's even think of those big companies that come and mine in there. They don't even spend money in that country. So how do you start doing that feasibility? How do you start looking on what is it contributing? Yeah, it's going to help people to get $1, $2 a day.